Welcome, folks, to this week's edition of Tech Sales Advice. I am, of course, your host, Chris White, and this is the LinkedIn Live program for pre-sales professionals and pre-sales leaders. As I like to say, these conversations are by design, unscripted, unrehearsed, and unpredictable. And folks, we're doing things a little bit differently. We're sort of kicking off a new format for Tech Sales Advice. As you can see, I'm not alone. I'm actually joined by a gentleman named Kerry Sokolsky. Many of you may know Kerry. He is officially now the co-host of Tech Sales Advice. And, you know, from time to time, I may let him just run it and I'll go take a vacation. Kerry, how are you, my friend?
Fantastic, Chris. I'm super excited to be joining you this epic. Is it 5 or 6 years now you've been doing this?
So this is season number 5. Yeah. So it's I think I lost track, but we're somewhere around 100 episodes. So it's been fun, and people know anybody and everybody who has seen any of these sessions or attended one of these sessions know I just love doing it. So it's great fun to have you join as part of the team. Speaking of team, I want to get right to our guest and our content today. So, folks, we're talking today about whether or not the skills that we develop as pre-sales professionals actually lead to or could potentially lead to success as an entrepreneur. I suspect the answer is yes. But our guest today has proven, at least he's becoming convinced, that the answer is a resounding yes. Without any further ado, let's invite our guest to the stage. His name is Scott Robohn, and I had to ask to make sure I knew exactly how to pronounce it. He is the founder and principal consultant of TechSalesCraft, and he's one of the co-founders of an organization called the Network Automation Forum. Scott, welcome, sir. How are you doing?
Really, really well. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Kerry. Great to be with you both.
So, Scott, in the little description, I think I wrote you originally were a network engineer, or maybe even before then, you were sort of dabbling in technology, got into networking, got into training, eventually found yourself as a sales engineer leader. You've been with a number of different organizations. Now you've launched your own business. I suspect you're still a bit of a recovering network engineer, but do you mind spending just a moment and sort of sharing, just a brief introduction about yourself? And by the way, before I even say that, I hope I don't know if it's Jorge or George. I hope I'm saying, maybe it's Jorge. Folks, we don't see you out there. So if you do care to say hello, or if you have any questions for Scott or myself, or of course, Kerry, please feel free to ask. Scott, that being said, do you care to share a little bit about your background?
Sure. As a kid, I played with computers in high school. That was a long time ago. I won't put a year on it. We'll let folks figure out from the gray density in the beard what that might be. But I had a career that really just grew up with the commercial internet, got fascinated with connectivity and networking early on. Didn't really study it in school, was kind of self-taught, and entered the networking industry in a time where it was all about being able to do. And there wasn't a pedigree. Nobody cared about, what piece of paper you had. I've just been super fortunate all along the way there to, start in, operations roles, kind of move into engineering and architecture roles, went to the so-called dark side of being a systems engineer. And I distinguish that intentionally from sales engineer, but let's call SEs and not distinguish too much there.
Fair.
Been interested in putting out my own shingle, doing something of my own for a long time. Came close to the precipice 6 or 7 years ago and backed up. But in 2022, I really felt like it was time. I did my planning, which one very important pillar is talking to your financial advisor and making sure what do things look like if I if I flop horribly, how bad will this be?
Yeah.
And that conversation was basically the last thing that gave me the confidence to say, okay, let's try this.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Well, first of all, congratulations on the launch. It's a little bit intimidating. It's a little scary. Clearly, you've done it. By the way, I see already a question in the chat that says, is there a great type of person that is a great fit to be an SE? I think we'll hold that just for a moment, but thank you for the question. I do want to touch on that. And I suspect we will a little bit, Scott. When you decided to jump from the safety net, if I can use that term, yes, pun intended, the safety net of being with a company fully, full-time employment, to jumping, were there some things that gave you reason for confidence that you think you developed as a pre-sales professional?
Well, that's a great question and theme. The short answer is yes. And I think achieving some sort of reasonable confidence level is a key enabler to being able to do something like this. There's a thing called imposter syndrome. We've all been impacted or continue to be impacted by it. And you get to a place where you have a reasonable estimation of your skills and abilities. And it doesn't have to be overblown. It's not fake it till you make it. But as an SE, time after time, pitching your product, presenting on technical issues, sales issues, and so forth, how can that not give you confidence over years and years of doing that? I will also give a special plug to, I spent time as a trainer before moving into the SE space, which I would say really helped me prepare decent presentation skills. We'll see if there's anybody listening out there that wants to dispute my presentation skills if they've ever heard me present. But that was key, right, to helping me be comfortable moving into the SE role. And then my SE roles, at Juniper Networks, where I spent a lot of my career as an SE, we had something called the customer team model, which exposed me to all different pieces of the go-to-market puzzle, including product management, product marketing, customer success, engineering, and so forth. And you get a little bit of everything there that enables you to try and do something like this, where you're responsible for all of it.
Yeah, it's pretty scary. And here's the irony. So we actually have 3 people on this call now who all launched at some point in the past decade or so, had the courage to launch a business after being pre-sales. Carrie, you did it a number of years ago as well. In hearing some of what Scott has shared, any questions come to mind for you?
Yeah, I and similar journey, Scott. It's interesting because as we sort of chatted about earlier, like I started as an entrepreneur before I got into pre-sales, and I remember when I sold my last company way back in the early 2000s, a friend of mine recruited me to come be the first solution engineer for his company, and I said, "What the heck's a solution engineer?" Or a solution consultant, and he said, he explained it to me, and I said, well, I don't know formal sales or whatever. And his response to me was interesting. It was, you've run a business, everything you do is sales. You do know sales. And so I guess the question for you is, you mentioned that you wanted to take this leap for a long time, and about 6 or 7 years ago, you started, or you had a false start. What finally got you over the edge, or what sort of held you back from first?
I think the financial concerns and questions, and like the ability to, how can I provide for myself? That was probably one of the biggest things holding me back. It wasn't necessarily directly related to confidence on that front. But once I had that question answered, and a good friend and mentor who kind of showed me through his doing, his entrepreneurship, and having a couple projects for me to work on right out of the gate, that was like the planets lining up and opening up the gate and making me feel comfortable enough to jump over the cliff, as it were.
As a follow-on question, in hindsight, do you feel like maybe you were too cautious, and did hitting or generating revenue, did it come easier than you thought it would, or do you feel like that maybe that caution that you had was probably the right approach?
Well, my best answer to that, Chris, is it is what it is. I can't go back and change it.
Yeah.
On one hand, could I have done this sooner? Probably. I just, for whatever reason, wasn't mentally ready until I actually did it.
Yeah.
But my hesitancy there gave me exposure to a couple different corporate employers and sets of technology that have really added onto my total cumulative knowledge base. So even though I could have done it sooner, I may not have gotten exposed to mobility equipment and infrastructure at Nokia, or disaggregated routing and switching at DriveNuts. Those are both super things to have touched and been a part of, and the cultures of both those companies. So it's all additive, and I tend to take a pretty positive, pragmatic, it is what it is, and here's who I am. Let's just keep moving forward.
I so love that answer, because I speak to a lot of people who look at what I've done. And by the way, Scott, like you, I mean, I was 51, 52 when I launched this business, right? So it was quite a ways into my career. And I speak to a lot of people who are much earlier in their career, and they share their desire to want to launch a business and, quote, do their own thing.
Sure.
And my response to them is, don't give up that dream, but timing is everything. And every step, and I think this is something you mentioned to me, every step is an important step in the journey. And as I reflect on my journey, I realize that, boy, there are times when it felt like maybe it took longer than it should have, but every step was so critical for me to have the right set of skills and insights and knowledge to be successful. And I think that's what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah, I mean, I know I'm the interviewee, but Carrie, you probably have perspective on that, on your previous experiences enabling you to move into a solution consultant role. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but how would you respond to that?
I think it's similar to your approach about it is what it is. I think it's a lack of apprehension to fail or slip up. You're going to fail or slip up when you start a business. There's just, you cannot, you mentioned earlier when we were chatting before you started that you like to plan things out, and starting a new business, you want to plan for sure before you launch, but you don't know what you don't know. And invariably, there's lots of stuff that we just don't know when we first launch into an entrepreneur business, especially if you've never run a business before. I think for me personally, it was the ability to realize, okay, if I screw up here, it's not the end of the world. There are ways around it. Let's course correct and move on. And that served me well getting into pre-sales, because, did I want to go do my first demo in front of the prospect before I felt I was ready? No, of course I didn't feel like I was ready. But I was thrown feet first into it. In fact, I remember my first demo that I had to deliver on my own. I didn't find out that I was going to get no support on that demo until literally 40 seconds before the call. The same friend that had recruited me had run shotgun with me in the first two demos. And then right before the fourth or fifth one, he basically turned to me and he said, by the way, I'm not going to be talking in this demo. You get tripped up, you got to handle it. And I think, like a lot of SCs, we learn best when we're sort of thrown feet into the fire. And I think there's value to that. And I think that plays out for entrepreneurs as well. You're always going to run into some new stumbling roadblock, whatever it is, and being able to not just be able to pivot, but also be able to roll with the fact that you're not going to have the perfect answer. You're not going to have the best result every time. And that's okay. You just got to learn from those things.
Yeah.
Yep.
Do you mind if we address? I would love to, Scott. I would love to hear your response to this question.
Same thought.
Yeah. So, by the way, the individual who we don't see who this was, it just says LinkedIn user. So thank you for the question. Is there a great type of person that is a great fit to be an SE? What comes to mind for you, Scott?
So Carrie's commentary raises a couple ideas of important attributes, right? And that ability to not be rocked when things don't go as planned. And that can be during a demo or just a presentation or your commission or a deal, right? You have just the steadiness and try to not be rocked when things change, because things will change.
Amen.
Another key attribute, I think, is being naturally curious. You have to really want to investigate and go beyond the slideware. And I've always felt like, even as an SE leader, I didn't feel like I had credibility, certainly talking to customers, let alone with the people that I have the privilege of working with and leading, unless I can at least have a connection with the technical content of what we're trying to do as a team. So being curious about the product and technology and even the markets that you're in, I think, is another key attribute.
Yeah.
I had another really pithy thing to say, but it's gone. But I'll stop at 2 there. I'm sure you guys have.
I'm sure you'll come up with another one. When did you know that sale? Let's start with just the sales engineer. That the sales engineer role was right for you.
So it was while I was a TAC engineer, and I spent 5 years in a post-sales technical support organization with a great boss who took care of his people, which is why I lasted 5 years in the role. And it became obvious that there's a really interesting dichotomy between being a trainer and being a TAC engineer. When you're a trainer, you need to know how things are supposed to work, ports and protocols, RFCs. Here's how the protocol machinery is supposed to work. In TAC, you see how everything breaks, and nobody calls you to thank you for keeping the internet up today. That's never a call that you get. Nobody opens up a ticket just to say, "Hey, I want to say thank you."
Hey, just wanted to call and let you know, like we had a really good day today.
Not going to happen, my friend. So that wears on you after a while. Some people are uniquely suited to deal with that, and they can have long careers in technical support, and we need them. Do not get me wrong, we absolutely need them. But I saw how these SEs operated, and in particularly at this company at the time, how close the SEs were to engineering, and even like function as an extension of engineering, and being that close to product development was really, really appealing to me, and being able to, kind of shift the conversation to going after opportunity versus fixing broken things. So that was like the gateway drug to becoming an SE for me.
I love that. Well, and what's particularly interesting to me about that is not only was it that being a TAC engineer just is taxing, if I can use that term, right, tiring, but the notion that you felt like you'd be actually closer to product and sort of an extension of the product teams was what drew you as well. So
yep. As a key factor for sure for me. Yep.
Interesting. Carrie, what other questions come to mind for you? I've got a few for Scott, but I want to give you a chance to interject here.
So I guess the obvious one is, what are the biggest gaps or skills that you realized you needed to acquire that presales didn't prepare you for when you took the leap to be an entrepreneur?
Yeah, so I would say the biggest one is business acumen. There is and I'm not going to say that being an SE limited me in this. In fact, as an SE, you're part of a sales organization, right? And then if you go a sales engineer, what's the first part of the job description? Sales. Right? So I had plenty of opportunity to understand what's happening from a business momentum perspective. I wish I had taken greater advantage of it. It's not like I didn't at all. And I had some great sales leaders and sales partners that helped me along that path, perhaps unknowingly. But I've had to play some catch up on my own, and that's okay. That's been That's been good, and I'm still learning on that front. But that's something that I would say to anybody, having a better understanding of the business side of what you do is really, really helpful, whether you're on a path to entrepreneurship or just functioning in the role that you're in, because it's called a business for a reason. I love the tech, and I used to chase the tech earlier on in my career, and I realized that working with good people when there's a good business case associated are more important than just the tech.
Yeah. It's interesting if I can interject. I've told people before, Scott, I never really got into sales until I launched my own business.
Sure. Yep.
And I never really knew what it meant to be in sales until I launched my own business. Have you had a similar thought or a similar perspective?
So that was a huge realization for me, where I, for lack of not having a good comprehensive understanding of all things, I learned early on, I'm my own salesperson, and I'm the one that has to go out there and be able to represent my product, my services, in a way that's meaningful to customers. I would say that's only one of the hats. That's a really important hat, but you're also your own product manager.
Amen.
You set direction on what it is you're delivering. You're also your customer success leader. If anything is broken, you have to fix it. Your engineering, you actually have to craft the product, whether that's, the analysis and reporting that you do, or if you actually get into building a product organization, right? You may start out as the architect, you may start doing some coding, you may bring in others as you go, but being a sales lead is an important hat, but there are many other hats other than just being your own salesperson.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's a really, really important point. I mean, you just a moment ago, you mentioned, look, the first part of sales engineer is sales. And look, I think the very first paragraph of my book is you are in sales, right? So we talk about this all the time, but we're in sales in the context of a greater team. The moment you become an entrepreneur, to your point, like it's sort of, particularly if you're a quote solopreneur, which you are, Carrie is, I am, sort of the buck stops with us, right? Whether it's sales, quote, customer service or customer success, product, et cetera. So interesting comment Clifford Barcliff shared. Thank you for sharing, Clifford. As an SE, one can develop plenty of business acumen, but one needs to seek the opportunities. Some sales organizations shield the SE role from sales and business. Any response to that, Scott? Have you seen that?
So Clifford, you're absolutely correct. That you don't really lack for opportunity to learn about the business side. While there is some shielding of SEs in some orgs, and it's not even just company by company. Different verticals or different sales areas within a company might give better opportunity to SEs to learn and develop on the business side than others, right? I would say let nothing stand in your way. So even that your comment about shielding, that's okay. You can find ways to get more information and to dive in. And I don't mean to pick on you, Clifford, and this particular comment, but I would just say be assertive. And we have this thing called the internet, which is really cool. And there's a tool called Google that we live in the most information-rich environment that anyone has in human history. Yeah, there's a lot of noise to sort through, but don't ever wait for someone to allow you or spoon feed it to you.
Yeah.
There's a follow-on realization I had too on day 2 of starting TechSalesCraft. I realized I'm not part of a bigger team anymore. And I may have had a knee-jerk panic reaction there. It did not last long. And I remember just having this realization of, okay, I'll just have to find other ways to create community and team. And I really want to point to, being an entrepreneur has given me the flexibility to engage in other pursuits like the network automation forum. And the long story short on this particular point is that's been an opportunity for me to be part of a community and actually help contribute to a community that has not only replaced hey, this is my team. I would say it's surpassed, and it's been incredible to be able to be part of this cross customer, cross vendor, cross organization community in a way that I've never been before.
Yeah. I love that. And you're right. I think when you become a solopreneur, you lose sort of that natural team that you're a part of. And tying this back to what Clifford was saying, you have to be proactive. You have to proactively seek out connections. You have to proactively seek out, quote, what I call industry colleagues. They're not colleagues in that we don't work for the same company, but they're industry colleagues. The analogy that comes to mind for me is it's one thing to have friends who are neighbors because they just happen to be right. I mean, you're just
Right.
neighbors. You're friends because you're co-located, right? It's the people that don't necessarily live on your street or in your neighborhood that you have to proactively seek out to maintain those friendships. It's similar to that as well. So I love that analogy. Guys, let me push our pause button here. Folks, we are speaking with Scott Robohn. He is the founder of a company called TechSalesCraft. He's a co-founder of Network Automation Forum. He is a longtime network engineer, trainer, sales engineer leader, and we're talking about how some of the things that he learned and the skills that he developed as a sales engineer helped him now as an entrepreneur. Carrie, allow me to push my own pause button. What other questions might you have for Scott?
So you've been a leader and an IC in pre-sales before. Curious what skills you got from being a pre-sales leader that specifically you feel have helped you.
I think probably top of that pyramid is partnering with sales leaders and developing some knack for sales. I'd say that's a direct benefit of being an SE leader. No question on that front. I think the ability to know where to point people within a company, I think also it both came from being an SE leader and helped me become an SE leader. Knowing that you can't ever know everything about a thing, right? But I know who can tell you, right? When you're at an organization for a long time, the negative way of saying it is we know where all the bodies are buried. The positive way of saying it is, yeah, I got a guy. I can point you to somebody. And just being a connector, I think, is, again, it can help you become an SE leader, and you develop those skills as an SE leader. There's a sales guy that I've worked with who I really enjoy, who kind of taught me that there's a thing called being a connector. And you can take that out of the context of a company and expand that, to working in a market and in an industry.
Love that. One of the things that I'm curious to get your take on. So one of the big things I would have probably attributed to something that I had to do really, really effectively as a leader, but not as critically as an IC, was just the idea of time management and prioritization. Right? You mentioned earlier, you are engineering, your dev, your product, your business development, your sales, your everything. That was one of the big things for me as an entrepreneur, both my early days and today, is just really figuring out where should you be spending your time, and doing so effectively. And I feel like while we do that as ICs, it's a really critical skill in pre-sales leadership as well. Do you find that was an issue for you starting out, that just you were being pulled in so many different directions?
For sure. And when you get that completely figured out, Carrie, let me know so I can lather, rinse, and repeat. So I will say that I've made progress on that front, but I've not arrived. Like I will, as part of my, TechSalesCraft umbrella efforts, I will come down to from time to time to say, okay, I have these 17 things I need to do. Which of them are the closest to helping generate revenue? And I'll prioritize that way. I will also say on the general topic of time management and connections to confidence or lack of confidence, I think very early on in my career and maybe up until 10-ish years ago, I think there's a group of people that I'm a part of where if you don't think you're smart enough or good enough, you'll compensate with just showing up and working the late hours. And sometimes you have to do that. There's no question. But working harder is not working smarter. And how do you get beyond that? That's not a direct time management question. It's more an ignoring of time management effectively. But you got to get to a place in your career where you don't feel like you have to do that all the time. And you recognize there are other people with domain expertise that I don't have, and I don't have to be the one researching it at 2 a.m, and so forth.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's time efficiency is really what it comes down to.
Sure. Yep.
Because especially as solopreneurs, there are unfortunately only 28 hours in the day until we move to Mars and get 4 extras. And so you really have to find a way to leverage your time effectively. For sure. So.
I'm curious.
I used there's an important, I'll call this out here. When I left a job and went to another company where I did not have years of experience, that was an opportunity for me to reset and say, okay, I'm not going to do that second shift after dinner. Because I'm not plugged into all the mailing lists. This was before Slack, people. I'm sorry. I'm not tied. I don't know where all the bodies are buried. And I'm going to use this opportunity to, not be that guy. And then when I moved back to the original company after a couple of years, I did my darndest to hold on to that philosophy, and it was okay. It was better than my previous stint, and it really helped me with quality of life and pay more attention to other really important people in my life, like my wife and my kids.
Yeah, I was gonna ask Scott. Now that you're here at this part of your career, you're an entrepreneur, solopreneur, you're running your own business, you hung your own shingle. Is there anything about the either the corporate life or the role of sales engineer that you miss?
Yeah, I mean, I do. It's funny that you ask that. I'm not sure there's any like a huge gaping, wow, I really miss X.
Yeah.
I miss a lot of the people that I used to work with. And they remain friends regardless of where our paychecks come from.
Yeah.
And that's a really important part of doing what we do as entrepreneurs. Your network is super important. It's way more important than I ever gave it stock to. While I do miss that being part of a team and being closer to some of the more technical innovation that companies in the network and communications product space, I feel that's been satisfied by other relationships and other things I'm doing now. So great reflection question, Chris. I don't think there's a whole lot I'm super missing.
Yeah. Well, and
the expense account, Chris.
What's that, Carrie?
The expense account.
That's true. I agree with that. Yes.
It does feel a little bit different when you're sitting down to dinner and it's costing your company, not the company, right? So that's a pretty good call out, guys. Let me press pause again, folks. We're speaking to Scott Robohn. He is the founder and principal consultant of a new company that he recently started called TechSalesCraft. He's also the co-founder of the Network Automation Forum. We've had a few folks chiming in the chat. If you care to share some thoughts. Yeah, Clifford mentioned a connector, someone with corporate social capital. As he have lots of potential to be connectors in the company. Well said, Clifford. We're talking about how the skills that we develop as pre-sales engineers translate into becoming an entrepreneur. I guess another question that comes to mind for me is, what do you feel like you have learned since making that leap and that jump? If anything in particular really stands out for you?
You really have to think about what the customer cares about.
Mm.
And I think some SEs are better at this than others, but you can get way too focused on, this is what my product does, this is what my service does, and I can't wait to tell you what we can do for you and what nerd knobs we have, and me, I, where if you're not putting it in the context of what customer problem does it solve first, none of the rest of it really matters. I'll never forget a key presentation that I was in years ago, where I'll leave out the names to protect the innocent, but we were pitching this customer for 45 minutes, and he was respectful and smiled and nodded, but he said nothing. He said absolutely nothing. And about 45 minutes in, I finally said, Bob's not his name, but Bob, I'd like to pause here and just really understand how you're reacting to this. And this is me as an SE director at the time with a salesperson. And I kind of gave him the floor, and he said, look, I understand how excited you are about what you're bringing to the table, but in this particular technology area, he said, what you're doing is breaking up a bookended ecosystem, that has an understood cost and ROI associated with it. And if you break it up and bring 17 vendors in instead of one vendor, everyone is going to want to monetize their piece part, and that's going to end up costing me money. And it's too bad it took us 45 minutes to actually finally ask him a question like that.
Such a good. Well, and here's what I'm hearing you say. We entered this conversation with a focus on what skills do we develop in pre-sales that can help us as an entrepreneur. And what you just shared is the reverse is also true, that there's some ways in which entrepreneurs need to think that will really help us as pre-sales, such as what you said. We always need to be thinking about things from the customer's point of view, and I mean, just so powerful. And so
there's a book that I read a few years back. I think it's Build Your Story Brand. And I can't remember the author. Most people would recognize him. I feel bad, but he basically talks about, you need to make the customer the hero of the story.
Amen.
You want your customer to be Luke Skywalker. How are you going to create the story around your customer, with his or her lightsaber, and how they're going to, take down the empire?
Yeah. I absolutely love that. Carrie, what else haven't we've got Scott here for about another, believe it or not, Scott, we've been at this for almost 40 minutes, and we've got another 15 or 20 minutes. Carrie, what else can we put on Scott's radar to share with our audience here?
Well, I want to elaborate a little bit on your last point, Scott, which I think is spot on about the focus on the customer. I think that there is a bit of a shift for a lot of pre-sales people to think about post-sale servicing as well. And there's talk about, does CS and pre-sale sort of blend into one? In some organizations it does, some it doesn't, for sure. I think as an entrepreneur, and I'm sure you probably would agree with this, is that you don't just need to think about what your customer is trying to solve right now, but you need to think about the lifetime value of your your offering and your service and your relationship with that customer. Because as entrepreneurs, we don't want a one and done. In pre-sales, when we're not involved with a land and expand or a recurring revenue source, or we just sign it once, we move on to the next one. And frankly, that's what I used to love about when I was an individual contributor was we had one product, we sold it, we moved on. I never had to deal with the problems of implementation and getting the customer happy. I was on to sell the next one. As entrepreneurs, we don't have that luxury. We want to keep our customers and have them be renewing with us and recurring with us. And I think that's a mindset that I think in pre-sales, we probably generally would be much more successful if we're thinking about our customers that way. Not just about what problem can I solve for you right now, but what other problems might you have in the future that we can address too.
So one little interesting follow-up there, I referred to that customer team model that I was a part of in the past. Customer service and customer success being a part of that customer team. You could think of, having everybody having a seat at the table with the sales leader being the quarterback, if you will, for you American football fans, or Canadian football fans with a longer field. Okay. Everybody's there and everybody's got a place on the team, but you have to, like SEs in particular, have to have a really good relationship with the post-sales team, because you have this technical connection where, you want to make sure everything goes smoothly, right? Unless you're able to just walk away after the sale. That's typically, in my experience, that wasn't the case. Also, those post-sale engineering resources are a great pipeline for future SEs. So not only do you have motivation to keep the customer whole, you have the ability to, there's a future SE or a person who can act in a different capacity on the team. That's really important for long-term thinking.
So okay. So my next question is, our ability to get our message out and exposure and awareness into the market of our offerings as an entrepreneur is a huge issue, especially as a solopreneur. We don't have massive marketing budgets. I don't think that, with exception, a ton of SEs or even SE leaders do a lot of work around sort of building their brands while they're employees, so to speak. How did you sort of leverage getting your name out? And was that a big adjustment for you when you were doing your business?
So it was an adjustment. And I started out with the impression that I'm going to have to do some focused marketing, which I wasn't comfortable with. And I knew I needed to figure out as we go. And as an important aside here, I think our time in the industry, there's more and more noise for us to all fight through. And I think we can all cite examples of marketing messaging that, let's just say, is not completely truthful. And
that's putting it politely, right, Scott?
I'm trying hard here. I want to be respectful of my good, hardworking friends in marketing roles. But the signal to noise ratio is so bad today that it's almost as if anything goes in terms of getting people's attention, because that's what it takes to get people's attention. Now, that's a longer conversation. I say it because it's something I'm very sensitive to and aware of. So going into, here's what I might need to do from a marketing perspective. I want it to get the right attention, but still be true. Thankfully, I really found that I didn't need to do much marketing at all. My LinkedIn network was incredibly critical. Like, I'll say it again, your LinkedIn network matters, and you're going to build it for years. And LinkedIn is just the tool that we use, or most of us use, to manage that today. It's not just LinkedIn. But most of my opportunities came through people I knew and reaching out and saying, hey, this is what I'm doing now. Here are my initial offerings. I think we could use your help. That's really how the pipeline started building, and revenue started coming in. Just from being assertive and reaching out to people who you think might be able to use your services.
And if I can chime in on that, I think that's one of the biggest differences between being a pre-sales or sales engineer and being an entrepreneur. And
Sure.
I say this all the time. As a sales engineer, we're used to being invited into the engagement, right? We're used to being invited to the party as
Sure.
the expert. When you become an entrepreneur, you can't sit back and wait to be invited into the party. Right? You have to be proactive. So it's sort of the two sides of the coin. There are certain things that I do think we do develop a business acumen. We do develop the ability to communicate and present. We do develop the technical acumen. But I think it's those muscles of being proactive. And by the way, I think the more we can begin to use those muscles of proactivity as a sales engineer, A, it's going to make us more successful in that role, and B, it's going to make us that much more well prepared if we decide, for any of you who decide to do, Scott, what you have done, right? Because there is, once you hang the shingle, there is no sitting back and waiting, right?
And let me give you my favorite music industry analogy here, and my apologies if I offend anybody's musical sensibilities, but there's the Dave Grohl story from Nirvana through Foo Fighters. Okay, Nirvana collapses with the tragic end of Kurt Cobain, and of course that's going to impact you horribly from a mental health perspective. And I think the story goes, Dave Grohl, after having been the drummer for Nirvana, just really couldn't do anything for about 9 months, and he gets a phone call from the manager for Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers saying, "Hey, we're doing Saturday Night Live, and we just had to let our drummer go, so we need a drummer. Will you come be the drummer for us on the Saturday Night Live gig?" And he goes, "Okay." He's ready for it. Go look at the video. If you enjoy that music, they're having a blast, right?
Okay. I don't think I've seen that.
So it goes really well. Grohl gets another phone call. Hey, you really gelled well with TP and the HBs. Do you want to be the new drummer for the Heartbreakers? And he goes, "No, I think I'm going to do something that I've never done before, that I'm not tested at. I've been recording this music in the back of the Nirvana bus for years, and I think I'm just going to try it, but I'm going to give it a really weird name so nobody knows it's me in case it fails horribly." And the Foo Fighters was born, and I think they've had a measure of success, we can say.
I think that's a fair statement.
And I compare, perhaps unfairly, TechSalesCraft to be my Foo Fighters moment, or at least my solo Dave Grohl moment. Maybe Foo Fighters is yet to come, but and I know there are details of the story that I've missed, and it's not directly applicable, but I think you get the feel for it.
So, and I just saw it. I mean, first of all, by the way, I can't help but draw attention to how impactful telling stories like you have shared with us a few times is. So again, anybody out there who is trying to become or thinking about becoming a sales engineer or looking to improve your game, Scott has demonstrated for us the power of storytelling. And really, Scott, what I hear you saying is that you had a few opportunities, maybe not Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, but something similar. And you said, you know what, I've been in the back of the Nirvana van, and I think it's time for me to put those to test. And obviously the rest is history. So absolutely love that. Carrie, I'm going to close with one last question for Scott, but before we get there, anything that you got to get off your chest, or any questions you want to make sure you ask before we let Scott out of here?
I'll ask one small question, and that is, if you were able to go back to your individual contributor SE days, or even your pre-sales leadership days, knowing what you know now, what one piece of advice would you give yourself?
I would just, this is to my younger Scott self, just relax a little bit. It's going to be
Mm,
okay. And there's a place for hard work, and stress can be constructive, but not everything hangs on every demo, every presentation, every RFP response. Just breathe and relax a bit. It's going to be okay.
The world will go on.
absolutely love that. Well, so I probably shouldn't be surprised by the fact that, and folks, I say, these conversations are unscripted, unrehearsed, and unpredictable. I shouldn't be surprised by the fact that Carrie asked almost the exact same question I was going to ask. Carrie and I tend to do that. We tend to think alike sometimes. So I'll go in a slightly different direction as we begin to wrap things up here. Scott, you've used the words TechSalesCraft a few times, but you haven't really talked about what it is. So do you mind just taking a minute and actually talking a little bit about what are you actually doing with TechSalesCraft? What is the service that you're offering?
So thank you for that. You can tell by the name that you and I have some similar thoughts around what tech sales is all about. And as I was formulating this plan and saw what you were doing, it's like, yeah, Chris and I need to talk, and we did
And we
talk.
did. We
A
actually met
year and a
we
half.
actually
That's right.
actually had lunch in Little Leesburg, Virginia, a year or so ago. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, I entered into this with the feeling that tech sales can really be viewed as a craft, something that can be honed and developed over
Love that.
time.
Yeah.
And my initial set of product offerings were focused on, well, what could I do to help sales teams and SE teams in particular develop and grow, but also help product organizations do a better job of bringing product to market. Some of that was involved in some of my initial projects. Since then, having the flexibility of having TechSalesCraft as my vehicle have allowed me to do things that I hadn't even thought of. Network Automation Forum is the best example of that. I wasn't on a mission to help drive the adoption of network automation a year and a half ago. But as I got to know this one individual, Chris Grundeman, he and I had very similar views and questions about why isn't network automation being adopted more quickly? And we basically looked at each other and said, we're both entrepreneurs. We don't have to ask anybody's permission. Let's get 200 of our best friends around the table talking about this. That turned into 340 people in Denver last November. And hopefully even more in Amsterdam at the end of May in just a couple months. So, I still have that heart for helping SEs develop, helping sales orgs develop, and helping get products to market. But this being able to dive into helping even just a little bit with the mission of network automation and supporting a much broader community that's actually doing the work and really just helping to be a connector there. TechSalesCraft has made that entirely possible for me, and I'm digging it, no question.
It's really amazing, and I do think that that's one of the unique aspects of being an entrepreneur is you head down a direction, and you may discover that there's a new opportunity in this way, or I'm feeling drawn to go in that way. We can make those decisions to take those turns or reroute a little bit. And it sounds like this has been, when you launched TechSalesCraft, you didn't necessarily expect to be creating this forum, right? This network automation community that is beginning to explode and creating an incredible opportunity for people in that space to connect and learn and grow, et cetera. So, and to me, I think that's really, that is the core of being an entrepreneur, is being opportunistic. And to me, I think the more we can think that way as sales engineers, for those of us who, and those of you who want to launch into that world of being an entrepreneur, it makes that transition that much easier. Not that it's easy, but you will at least have developed some of the skills and confidence to go into that space. So
being able to identify opportunity that align with things that you're just really interested in.
Mm.
You know, I've never done anything like this. I've never trusted a business partner like this for someone I didn't know, and it's really been incredible. I'll just leave one last tip of the hat to my existing consulting clients that I still have engaged with. I basically I end up wearing consulting CTO hat for my other customers, and that's also incredibly enjoyable. I don't want anybody to come away thinking that you know, everything's in the shadow of network automation for them. But
Yeah.
thanks, Chris. Just wanted to get that in.
Yeah, no. I'm glad. So Scott, fair to say that people can reach out to you if they're not connected. I'm sure you'd love to hear from people.
Yeah, please. LinkedIn is the best place. My DMs are open. Scott Robohn. There aren't too many of us. I don't know of any others. If you find another Robohn, I'm probably related to them. So yeah, hit me on LinkedIn. Be happy to connect.
Fabulous. Carey, any closing thoughts or words from you, sir?
It's always fascinating hearing a fellow entrepreneur's journey, and especially when we share similar backgrounds prior to that. So I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing with us today, Scott.
Yeah.
Thank you both. This has been wonderful.
And I'll echo those sentiments, Scott. Congratulations. You and I met before you launched. It's really exciting to see that you've launched. Super happy for you and your success. And of course, wish you continued success. Scott, hang around backstage just for a minute. We'll say a few parting words. To everyone else, folks, thank you so much for tuning in. If you like these, you can follow hashtag TechSalesAdvice. We try to do this every week. Scott, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much.
Bye, all.